It would take me another decade even to visit this pot of suck that really needed me to look in and really truly heal what I imagined, what my worth was and who I am if I wasn't performing, if I wasn't making everyone else happy, if I wasn't contributing, if I wasn't, doing this next layer of success and all of these things. It was that level of escapism until I couldn't escape anymore, until I could not hide all of those emotions and bypass essentially my own work of healing through that and my own work of going deeper and honoring myself and saying, wow, yeah, that really sucked. And acknowledging the pain of that. I think it's so much easier in our culture and nowadays to shove it under a rug, shove it, put it in the back seat, fake it till we make it, which is another one. But what about just feeling it to heal it? Reframe the stories that we actually have in our head at a deeper level.
This is Impact, the podcast where we explore entrepreneurship, mindset, and health to provide you with the ingredients for an unregrettable version of your life story. The DNA Company is an innovative provider of functional genomic solutions for personalized health and wellness. With over 2 decades of research, 10,000 plus genomic samples, including my own, and thousands of clinical consultations, their reports can identify outcomes like chronic fatigue, dysregulated hormones, poor emotional resilience, addictions, chronic inflammation, metabolic dysfunction, weight gain, and more. Discover how the DNA Company's genomic insights can help your patients improve their health outcomes. Right now, as an exclusive offer to listeners, get $100 off DNA 360 test and report by going to thednacompany.com/impact lives. A famous fictional philosopher once said that life is not a box of chocolates. And I couldn't agree more. In fact, as a kid, I remember being at university, asking people about their life and learning about people's lives and what they're going through. And I clearly and distinctly remember the emotional cascade when someone would share, I've never had to deal with anything. I've got this great family and everything's kind of perfect. And I remember the fear I would feel for them around missing out on the opportunity for growth. Now, as I worked through my life and sat as a clinician and heard people's stories, I came to the conclusion that trauma is likely pervasive in most of our childhoods, whether it fits the traditional definition or it was simply traumatic for you, that this idea that someone lived this stress-free existence in the first quarter or start of their life, that was truly a rare find and gem. But also as that clinician, also as that person who has had the deep privilege of sitting with others, and also as someone who is sitting and has sat with herself, I know that there is also something equally rare. And that is the decision and the capacity to take that pain and to take those moments and not suppress them or move them deep into the holding tanks of your emotional toes, but to actually face them head on. That is the work of my guest today, Dr. Neeta Bhushan. Dr. Neeta started her career as a cosmetic dentist, as one does, and realized that her true life's work, her true gift and capacity is to help people find and discover their own inner resilience. As the co-founder of the Global Grit Institute, a mental health training platform for leaders and professionals, she is the co-founder of the Dharma Coaching Institute, training thousands to live their best lives. She is a world-renowned speaker on grit and resilience. She has shared the stage with umpteenth teachers and leaders in the space of personal development. And she is here today to share her message of That Sucked, Now What? Also the title of her brand new book. And it's such a fitting interview and conversation to have at the beginning of the year. And as I've shared at the beginning of of a time I am dedicating to unpacking some of my own shadows, some of those things that I just feel are holding me back from being the next version of myself as a mother and as a leader and as an entrepreneur and as an entrepreneurial artist and all of those things that I consider myself to be. I am deeply honored for the opportunity to not only have this conversation today, but to share with you my friend, Dr. Neeta Bhushan. Dr. Neeta Bhushan, welcome to the Impact Podcast.
How's it going, Megan? It's so good to have you and be here on your show. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is a true honor, and I've been looking forward to this conversation, as equally the release of your new book. So, as we're like jumping into this conversation, I actually feel like your title is the stepping off point for where I want to go with this conversation, and we'll delve into your experience and the work at the Global Grid Institute. But that sucked. Now what? The title of your new book, what sucked?
Okay, so I had many suck moments. I think, starting out from when I was actually a budding dentist. I remember, and I love sharing this story because then it can kind of give context to where we want to go. But I think specifically for you, when I was thinking about our chat and how we dove in at that retreat that we were together, I remember that when I was actually a new budding dentist, I mean, I don't know about you over there, but here, there was probably like, I don't know how many women were in my class in dental school. And so coming out the gate, I knew that I wanted to just create and just head out of the gate like running and creating my own practice and doing things on my terms. And so I only saw a lot of the males doing that. And so there wasn't necessarily that, how would you say, now I would call them expanders or kind of the vision of what's possible. And so I only saw my male colleagues doing it. So guess what? I started to act and feel like my male colleagues, literally wearing up like, turtlenecks and button up. I would wear like the button up blazers so people would take me seriously because I already looked so young, so funny. And I remember right when I graduated, I thought I was going to get this like first job as, the youngest dentist at this like really prestigious cosmetic dental office. And everyone was, doing these full mouth reconstructions. It was a big deal because then these people would get placement in these big magazines. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to be all a part of, all about it and all part of it. And I was interning there. And after that month, I didn't get the job. So that sucked. Now what? And that really informed me of starting my own practice and actually taking the leap and buying my own practice from somebody that was 40 years senior to me. He was retiring and I was just entering the field. But one of the things that I was actually hiding and would come full circle, which would then open up this full Pandora box in my life, was shortly after that, about 15 months when I actually signed the lease and purchased this practice from this retiring dentist. There was a whole sense of imposter syndrome, and there was a whole sense of just, who am I? I have this, my name is on the door, and it's all of these things that I thought I wanted, but I didn't really believe it because I hadn't faced the truth that I was actually hiding. And it kind of came crashing down on me at the end of the year in 2011. When I actually realized that I was in this very toxic relationship and it was a toxic marriage, that, there's all these like red flags. And many times we tend to overwork ourselves and distract ourselves because we're kind of running away from things that are so deeply wounded in our own personal life. And that was my Band-Aid. My work was my Band-Aid for me, thinking that, oh yeah, I don't have to deal with a lot of these things that are now, by the end of 2011, were really taking ownership of my life. And in ways that it really, my life was threatened. And so I had to make a conscious decision at the end of that year. In fact, it was New Year's Eve. I packed up whatever I could and I said to myself, okay, I can't do this anymore. And there was so much fear because I had purchased this practice. I was like a big shot. What would my family think? Because I culturally come from an Indian Filipino background and divorce is like a no-go. And what would my friends think? Because they thought there was this like perfect marriage on the outside and, thinking that I had it all together. I was the youngest person in my class and pretty much one of the only females to actually set and take this leap and buy this practice. I wasn't even 30 yet and had all of these like trappings of success. But internally, I was spiritually dead. I was mentally afraid of pretty much everything at this point. And I was so scared. I mean, scared for my life and scared for what would the world think. And mostly that I would disappoint the ghosts of my parents, because one of the big factors in my journey was that I had lost 3 members of my family, my mom, my dad, and my brother, all to medical diseases and medical conditions before I was 19. So I had a lot of trauma that I hadn't fully dealt with. I was masking and band-aiding a lot. And it all just kind of came full out, like it bursted at the seams. And that then began my journey of the now what into this next evolution of myself.
There is an emotional maturity that is sort of present in what you are talking about, because you started with this opening story and led to where there's deep trauma and significant shifts and loss in your life. And for a lot of people, what that becomes is evidence of like, oh gosh, like I am not worthy of this. They go down the downward spiral. And even the energy of your title of your book is very much like, no, I am going to decide to spiral up. Like, where did that come from? What inspired that light? Because that's a different decision. And I'm just curious where the capacity to make that decision came from.
Oh my gosh. Thank you for seeing me. And thank you for even asking a question like that and framed it, in that way. Because that's totally who I am at my core. I mean, I've been through a lot of darkness. I've been through a lot of shit moments, and to walk the path of that amount of darkness when you're that young, where, I mean, from the ages of 10 till 19, I was a caretaker, and my mom had a long battle of breast cancer. I mean, that was really our upbringing, right? Then a year after that, my brother died of an asthma attack. And so to be in that much darkness for a very long time, you kind of are forced to find the slivers of joy. It's kind of like my subtitle, embrace the joy and chaos and find magic in the mess. I was trying to find the magic because I didn't want to stay in that darkness for so long. And so much so that, one of my coping mechanisms growing up was this positivity, because that I needed to bring that light to my family. My brother, DJ, he was that light. He was a comedian. He was a jokester. I mean, that's who he was. And I felt like when he transitioned, it was almost like somebody needed to bring that flair back. And I felt like to keep his essence alive, I don't even share this on many podcasts, I wanted to infuse that in our day to day. And that really taught me one of the key pillars in the book, which is your emotional capacity to expand, to allow yourself to feel. And for a very long time growing up, I was supposed to be the happy girl. I was the eldest. So there's a lot of responsibilities placed on that, like coming from these immigrant cultures. And so I was the one where it's like, okay, bringing all the family members together, making sure everyone's taken care of. And this sense of enthusiasm and optimism, that was what I was validated on, especially when people would come over and pay their respects and see my mom in the hospital or my dad in the hospital. So I grew up having to take on that persona. And then fast forward when I would have the biggest kind of upheaval and awakening in my own healing journey of this divorce that came crumbling and crashing down on a mental, physical, and spiritual level, I had to be okay with allowing the parts of myself that I had denied. I had to be okay allowing the contrast of the happiness, the contrast of the joy, and really go into the depths of the sadness and the sorrow but not get stuck there. And that's the difference in my book. It's the understanding, well, it's not this sucks where we're in this suck right now. It's that suck. So there's already an ownership and a responsibility that whatever happened really sucked. And I honor you for it. I see you for it, but we're not there. I have all the tools and processes to take you to feel it and embody it and really sit with those discomforting feelings. But I don't want you to fully be there for a while, which is why the next part of that is, now what? Now what? What are we going to do? And I think I've been so good at the now what piece that for that period of time in my 30s, I needed to go into the suck. I needed to feel those because then when I found love again, which I did. And so for people listening who are thinking, oh my goodness, they're in that part of their suck, is there an opportunity for you? And I think there's definitely hope there. But when I found love again and when I actually forayed into motherhood, and I think you and I, Meghan, were talking a little bit about that, and all the bells and whistles that come with that, I had to revisit some of that suck again in a whole new way, where it was also allowing me to make peace with some of the really heavy, big T traumas of loss, of divorce, of domestic violence, but now into the little T's of every day of like the overwhelm and the stress and the anxiety and the mom guilt and the shaming and all of those things that come with the regular days of motherhood and how to kind of counteract and balance that. But I would say at my core, that's who I've always been, is this optimistically positive person. And I even talk about it in the book around the harm in those coping mechanisms where we are toxically positive, and to also embrace and invite some of those feelings that we're actually not okay with. And I was faced with some of those feelings that I wasn't okay with, like my rage and my anger. And I've revisited that when I actually fell into, postpartum depression with my first child. And it was almost as if I was visited by, my rebellious teenager that couldn't yell at the doctors, that couldn't fully express when that same doctor was giving my dad a diagnosis, that he had 10 minutes to live. And it was almost like it was coming back again. But yet, while I was, 1 month postpartum and the hormones are raging and I'm like losing it on my mother-in-law who just wanted to make me some Ayurveda khichdi, and my husband who didn't wash the bottles right. And so I think those are all valid parts of ourselves that I think a lot of times, especially as women, we're so quick to judge those emotions and feelings. And it's really in that emotional capacity where we are inviting ourselves to really explore the edges of what we may not necessarily be okay with.
What is the work, the shadow work for managing that toxic positivity element? And so, I almost feel in the context of this question, I'm just trying to make sure I put it in the right, in an understandable capacity. This notion of toxic positivity to me is just another tool of escapism to not have to just do the work. And given your experience, what is the work that enables you to not escape to the toxic positivity?
I think the work really came to be really reconciling with my abandonment issues, the abandonment, the self-worth of, when I lost those 3 members of my family at such a young age, all you want to do as a teenager is fit in. You don't want to talk about anybody that's died. You don't want to be the odd person in the room. I remember vividly, there's a story of when I couldn't, and I chronicleize this in the book, but when I think I was a junior or senior, I was 19 in college, and I just I just needed to get away. And so I basically took a study abroad in Rome, and I had convinced my very strict grandmother and aunt to let me go because, of course, anything is on education. But it was a year after my dad had passed away. So I was actually 20. And my heart needed to visit a completely different place. So when I got to Rome, it was as if I was entering a whole new dimension, a whole new world, a whole new set of people. And it was like, oh wow, I've changed my environment. I can totally shift who I am here. I don't have to be that darkness that I had, this like lingering cloud over my head. But it gave me a few things. It gave me time and perspective to process the heaviness, because when you're in it and when you're in the suck, you can't see anything out of that suck. Sometimes you can't even see or picture a new reality because you've been washed over with this waft of grief and waft of, sucky moments that you're almost fully in it. And everything in your reflection is reflecting that back. Yet when I got out of my own container of what sucked, I was able to not only meet amazing other people from around the world. And when those questions would still come up, hey, how's it going? Oh, tell me about your family. What does your mom do? What does your dad do? We're young people, right? In our late teens, early 20s, I would immediately know who I would share that particular information with. Because again, who wants to have that pity party and go down the deep end with people that you just met in different places all around the world, versus you then get to choose. And I had so much perspective because it was like, oh wow, I'm not the only one that's going through difficult times. It's that shared reality and shared humanism. And also that I became a really good question asker, and call it deflection for that time. But it was great because then I chose the people that I wanted to get close to, or who was going to be in that inner circle. Because on the opposite side of that, to your question, Megan, yeah, was it painfully hard to actually go in the depths of that? Sure. Absolutely, which is why it would take me another decade even to visit this pot of suck that really needed me to look in and really truly heal what I imagined what my worth was and who I am if I wasn't performing, if I wasn't making everyone else happy, if I wasn't contributing, if I wasn't doing this next layer of success and all of these things. It was that level of escapism until I couldn't escape anymore, until I could not hide all of those emotions and bypass essentially my own work of healing through that, and my own work of going deeper and honoring myself and saying, wow, yeah, that really sucked. And acknowledging the pain of that. I think it's so much easier in our culture and nowadays to shove it under a rug, shove it, put it in the back seat, fake it till we make it, which is another one. But what about just feeling it to heal it? And that's a big mantra, let's feel it to heal it so that we can rise through it and, reframe the stories that we actually have in our head at a deeper level.
What do you have to say to a society in general that goes to the lengths of the earth to not have to feel hard things? We have pharmaceutical tools that we have normalized. We have alcohol and drugs that we have normalized. We have toxic positivity and high vibes that we have normalized. We have normalized leveraging quick and easy tools to not have to feel the feelings. What do you want to say to us? We're all listening about doing the work.
Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's messy. Yes, it's chaotic. I almost imagine it as this is, it's that boiling pot of water. And if you're like me and have ever made, whether it's soup or for me, it's chai every morning. And when I put that, pot of water on the stove and I crush up my cardamom and my ginger and I put it in there, But if I were to, instead of take the aroma of that and savor the aroma of what the cinnamon is bringing and what all of these essential ingredients are bringing to make this chai, and actually stick my fist inside that hot boiling water, well, guess what? What's going to happen? My fist is going to scald. I'm going to get like, I don't know, is it a second degree burn, third degree burn? It's going to burn. It's the pain is the indication of that something is there. Something is there where it is, even though it's discomforting, even though it's completely out and it's uncertain. We don't know how long we're going to feel that pain for. We don't know how long we're going to feel that the feelings of uncomfort, discomfort. But when we actually turn down the stove, move that pan of water away, we can actually look at it and look at that wound and start to heal that and start to see what is pain teaching me. And I think in all of my suck moments, and for everyone who likes to use the quick and easy, and what our culture has really embraced of this quick, fast, and easy tools to escape, what if we just allow and see, well, how can we stretch? How can we expand? Because many times, and I know for myself and so many people that I've even interviewed for the book, it's when we take a moment to stop and pause, because that pain is a signal that, hey, our body needs us. Hey, our emotions are telling us something. Hey, it's that boiling, scalding hot water that if we don't move it, if we don't turn the heat off, it's going to burn our hand off. And to actually stop and see, well, what is that actually telling me? And also, what part of ourselves are wanting to come up to the surface? Because it's almost like healing that scab and that wound. It's coming up so that we can have fresh skin and a new perspective, even for ourselves and even for our becoming. And even, I think, for that next level of who we were meant to be. And it's almost like a video game, right? And that first game, I don't know if you probably were around when we had Mario Kart, but playing Mario Kart as a kid, level 1, super easy, no obstacles, no challenges. Level 2 gets a little bit harder. Level 3, if you're lucky to make it, you have to jump over things, and there are things like trying to kill you. Level 4, at every single level, it up levels you. So if we're kind of in this virtual reality world even more and more now, what makes us think that we still, on a regular human level, that there are levels to our evolution, and that's biological? Yet we're so afraid of diving into the depths of that pain to really uncover and sit with the beauty and the magic of what comes up as a result of it. That can truly change our life.
I feel that so deeply. I'm very aware, and I've talked openly on our podcast for this year, that I'm dedicating this year to doing, or longer, like I'm not confining it to that number, of doing the work that enables me to level up, like facing those shadows and facing those traumas and those past pieces. Because I really do feel like I've done this level. Like I'm looking for, where's the magic flag that you have to jump onto to move on to the next piece. But you've got to do the work. It's not just checking all of the boxes. And the vision that is opening up to me as I do that work is amazing. Like that's the gift in and of itself. You talk about this concept in the book and otherwise of audacious resilience. What do you mean by that?
So I love the word audacity, because it is just so,
It's great.
It is your intentional, like it is your unapologetic intention. And it's so intentional of your way of being. It's a commitment to taking a stand for whatever that is, whether it's, speaking your voice, whether it's focusing on you, whether it's recommitting yourself, right? And then the resiliency is not just the toughness, because if we take, in that example that I gave of the boiling hot water, if we take any piece of glass or even, granite, or maybe even, the what we actually think of as like tough, right? And we let that go and we allow it to shatter into a million pieces. It's going to shatter because it's tough and it's brittle and it's strong, but we let it go and it's still going to break. What if we take the literal meaning of resilience, which is resiliere, which is to bounce, and we actually take a rubber ball and we let that rubber ball go. And guess what? It's going to bounce. And why? It's not going to shatter because, well, it has a little bit of give. It has a little bit of flexibility. It has a little bit of agility so that we're not so rigid, that we can shift, we can flow, we can move. And that's where I think our greatest capacity for growth is, to have the audacity, the intentional commitment to flex and not be so rigid when tough times come our way, that we can actually still gain that perspective. And there is, 4 pillars that I talk about that will help build your audacious resiliency. We talked about already too, our upbringing and what the pieces of our upbringing that we still haven't peered into yet. And the second piece of that is the emotional capacity, which we already talked about. But the third piece of that is our current environment. What are we exposing ourselves to? Like you said, you're like, I want to do the work. I want to get more into it. I want to see what else is there. That's that introspection. And that's also part 4, which is your radical self-awareness of knowing and really knowing and saying, all right, I'm ready for that next level of growth, of evolution, of what no longer fits. But that we need to sit with those parts of ourselves to really know what is meant for us in that next level, because most of us are kind of just passing things by, right? But with that good stress, we're actually exposing ourselves to things that are going to be uncomfortable. Like, for instance, maybe taking that leap, or maybe doing things and putting ourselves out there in one way or another. And all of it then comprises your audacious resilience.
What is your audacious vision for this book?
Wow. Well, I think that, coming from the lens that this is coming from, that sucked, now what? I want this to be easy access for the tools of any person throughout the challenges that they may be facing, whether it's loss, whether it's hardship, whether it's a season of feeling stuck, whether it's after divorce. I mean, this has been an accumulation for so many of my years of training with sucky moments, and now being able to put it in a way that's digestible for so many people to take that walk and to incorporate the tools of building your bounce factor, the tools of actually then flying forward, and the tools that, when we have hard times, that we are not just going through the quick fix, but we're actually challenging ourselves to be in the discomfort so that we can rise and we can actually fly forward past all of those sucky moments with ease and with grace. Not to say that things are never going to happen, because we know it's inevitable. It's part of the human experience. But when they do, we have such an appreciation for it, and we're thanking it.
And ease is not easy. Just to be really clear, they're not necessarily the same tools and the same mindset and the same vibration. I am so excited to get my hands on this book, and we're going to tell everybody how they can do it. But before we do that, I have a series of questions I'd love to ask right at the end of the interview. So I'm going to throw those your way, and then we're going to tell everyone how they can grab a copy of that stuff. Now what? So my first question for you is, what fun, weird talent do you possess that we would not otherwise know about unless you shared it right here, right now?
Oh my goodness. Okay. I have a secret love affair with stand-up comedy. And that has always been, I mean, I think it goes with, the extreme, hardships, to see the extreme joy and how that is all intertwined. But yeah, maybe one day. I've taken stand-up comedy a few times, but I think maybe one day there is a set coming out for sure.
What's the biggest non-negotiable for you in your life?
Vulnerability.
What is your most important failure?
My first marriage.
Last question for you. What do you want your legacy of impact to be?
To give people permission to suck, to give people permission to play, and to really embrace their magic and their mess through joy, through chaos, knowing that life isn't as hard as, sometimes we may think, and to really relish in it all.
Amazing. Dr. Neeta Bhushan, I could do this with you all day long. Before we close off this interview, can you please share with my listeners where they can get their hands on your new book and follow along for all the adventures that I know are coming your way?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, this baby is ready for order on, it's thatsuckednowwhat.com. So that sucked. ednowwhat.com, and you can say hi. I'm on Instagram at Neeta Bhushan. And then also, when you actually order, I do have an amazing gift for your audience. You actually get the 44-page color coded handbook, and it goes through a lot of the things that we talk about in building your bounce factor and flying forward, in making peace with some of the emotions that we might not be okay with, and knowing where we are kind of diving into those parts of ourselves to heal. And it also comes with my 5-day fly forward healing practice, all for free when you get a copy of the book.
Amazing. Links to be able to access the book and follow along with Neeta will all be available in our show notes. That is meghanwalker.com/podcast. Dr. Neeta, thank you for your time today. It was such an honor having you on the show.
Oh my God, Megan, thank you so much. We could do this again. It was so much fun.
And we will. Impact is what lives on when we leave the room, tuck them in, or step off stage. It is less about what you do, more about how you make them feel, and everything about how you choose to show up in the world. If you enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this episode. I am your host, Meghan Walker. Until next week, aim for impact.